We know that our health is affected by many things. Certainly one of those is access to medical care, which is influenced by having a high-quality insurance plan. Another is our environment, which is affected by energy conservation, our sources of energy, and our recycling behaviors. A third is the safety of the products that we buy and the consumer protection standards that are in place. And there are many other factors like home ownership and mortgage protection, being able to communicate, especially for those who are deaf, hard of hearing, or who have speech difficulties, and your financial literacy. At the state level, one would expect that all of these health-related activities would be managed by a health agency. Typically, the Minnesota Department of Health would come to mind. But this is a good example of how the work of public health is shared across many agencies. That's why we'll be talking about the Minnesota Department of Commerce on today's episode of A Public Health Journal.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal, a program that explores public health issues facing our society today and tomorrow. The host of the show is Dr. Ed Ellinger, Commissioner of Health for the state of Minnesota. A Public Health Journal is sponsored by the Minnesota Department of Health and the Hennepin County Human Services and Public Health Department, all working together towards the goal of healthy people living in healthy communities.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal. The Minnesota Department of Commerce has a wide variety of issues for which it is responsible. Some of these include consumer protection, nuclear energy, alternative energy sources, energy conservation, recycling, home mortgages, financial literacy, health insurance, and many, many more. All of these areas impact the health of Minnesotans. That's why I've invited Commissioner of Commerce Michael Rothman to join me on today's show. Commissioner Rothman is an attorney who has a broad range of private and public sector regulatory experiences. He's been Commissioner of Commerce since January of 2011. Mike, good to see you on this show today.
Great to see you.
We work on a whole variety of issues, and I know we work together on the governor's health sub-cabinet, and where we've done a lot with the Affordable Care Act, and you've certainly been engaged in a lot of insurance issues, but I suspect people don't really recognize a whole variety of other things that you do related to health. So before we talk about insurance, which we'll spend some time on, give us a little sense of what does the Department of Commerce do?
Well, the Department of Commerce, interestingly, does insurance regulation, banking regulation over state banks. We also regulate the securities at the state level. We interact with the Securities Exchange Commission. And then we regulate 20 plus more industries, including, as you mentioned, the energy sector. We work with the Public Utilities Commission in the development and, for example, rates that people pay for their electricity and natural gas. As you mentioned, for renewable energy products, standards, development for Minnesota, and then conservation programs. We also house the low-income heating assistance program for Minnesotans. Those viewers that are familiar with that can apply for assistance on their energy bills to have those reduced or help pay for them. And then we also have a weatherization program. The list keeps going on, but the department, as I say to a lot of folks when I'm speaking, encompasses a large segment of Minnesota's economy. Again, from insurance, financial industry stuff to energy and telecommunications. We also work on broadband development on behalf of the governor. Governor Dayton has a philosophy of having border-to-border broadband. We're working on how, with the private sector, we can expand that. That has a health impact because more of our institutions are using the internet, using different ways to communicate on health, diagnosis, information exchange, access, and all that. So it's quite a broad scope of
certainly the things that impact health. First, your economic situation impacts your health, and then your educational experiences, and you do something on both of those. So let's talk about the energy area for a while, because I think most people may not be aware of that. First of all, what's the Public Utilities Commission, and how do they work with you?
Well, the Public Utilities Commission is sort of a quasi-judicial agency. They're responsible for oversight of the utilities industry in collaboration and partnership with the Department of Commerce. So they make and hear decisions on the rates that people pay in Minnesota, They work on resource planning, meaning transmission lines, where should facilities be built, like plants and transmission lines. And then our department works with them in a symbiotic way, because we're responsible for acting on the behalf of the public interest, all Minnesotans. So when, for example, there's a rate case, our staff will go in and argue that the utilities are or are not asking for too much money for their rates. For example, recently in the XL, we have a rate case where XL's asked for a certain amount of money. We're hearing that, and we've advised the PUC that that rate is too high. We think it should be less, and that we will be able to continue reliability, the safety, and the rates that are appropriate. That
sounds like that's part of your consumer protection activities in some respect.
Yeah, exactly.
So what about the conservation stuff, the geothermal energy and the wind energy and the solar that people are really talking about as a way to reduce greenhouse gases, become more energy sufficient? Yeah. What's your role in that?
Well, the Department of Commerce oversees the Conservation Improvement Program. This was a law passed by the Minnesota legislature, where our goal is to reduce greenhouse gases in Minnesota. The specific goal is to try to get those down 15% by 2015. We're on track we're at about a 3% reduction since 2005. But through conservation and, as you mentioned, clean energy, renewable energy sources, we're able to use alternative sources. And of course, the big source of greenhouse gas in the energy sector is coal. Mm-hmm. And to the extent we can reduce our reliance and use of coal, we will bring down the greenhouse gas for that sector. So at the Department of Commerce, we work on programs with the utilities to reduce consumption of energy by industrial users and residential users. And then we also, through that program, have, for example, the Solar Rewards Program that XL administers. Last year, I approved and required that program to continue through 2015, funded at $5 million a year, so that Minnesota residents can have access to a program to finance solar, photovoltaic or anything like that. So our department has staff. We have analysts on, as you mentioned, the nuclear sector, on the natural gas sector, on conservation program, on solar, on wind. And then we work on siting of transmission routes that help us get the energy sources like wind from southwest Minnesota distributed through our energy grid so that we can actually use all this good energy. So
I know this is, in the past, this has been an area where commerce and health have worked together because people are concerned about the health impacts of high power transmission lines through their fields.
Exactly.
Has been an issue.
Yeah.
All right, well, I want to talk about some of the consumer protection activities that you do, but first we need to take a break.
Great.
We'll be back right after this message.
When things don't fit, life can get uncomfortable. We all need help sometimes finding the right fit.
I'll go change.
If you're not sure, you should ask.
So any advice?
As long as you're asking the right person. The right fit can be crucial.
So where's that leak?
So don't take chances, especially when it comes to insurance. Get out and get smart about insurance.
To help you decide the right insurance fit for your life situation, call the Minnesota Department of Commerce or go to insureyouonline.org.
Welcome back. We're talking about the Department of Commerce with Mike Rothman, the Commissioner of the Department of Commerce, and we're talking about all of the health implications of the activities of the department in Minnesota. Mike, one of the big areas is consumer protection. I think people recognize that that's one of the roles. So tell us a little bit about what's the scope of consumer protection. Certainly we mentioned it a little bit just in terms of rate setting for energy sources, but what other things are you involved with?
Well, the Department of Commerce is charged by law and by the governor to be a strong consumer advocate, a strong proponent of advocacy for consumers. We have, for example, a consumer response team where Minnesotans can call to make complaints that we help look into, mediate, and investigate in insurance matters, from everything from health insurance, homeowners, auto. We also have folks working on the security. So if you have a complaint about investing in something that made no sense, a fraud. In fact, consumer fraud throughout the economy comes to the Department of Commerce, and to the extent that we have investigators, we will send those folks out, investigate on behalf of consumers. We'll bring complaints against companies, insurance companies, securities companies, if it happens to be the banking sector as well. We also oversee mortgage in the real estate sector. We regulate and license over 350,000 Minnesota professionals or companies in all of these areas. And what we do every day is to make sure that we're protecting consumers. If we get a complaint, we'll look into it, and then as well go after it in an enforcement capacity. 99% of the companies in Minnesota do great things. You know, the bad apples are out there. They call us, and we do everything we can to help protect Minnesotans. Another aspect of this is education. Since I started as commissioner, I've beefed up our educational component of consumer protection so that whatever it is, if it's insurance and health or auto or homeowners, if it's securities, how investors can protect themselves, how people can find us. And this month, for example, is a financial literacy month, where we're out working with your agency and as well as a bunch of other agencies, collaborating to teach Minnesotans from kindergarten through retirement how they can better handle, better work on their financial security, capability, and literacy, so that they can survive, work better, and be able to retire well in Minnesota. So there's a big aspect of consumer protection.
Let's talk a little bit about financial literacy, because I know that's a huge issue. Why is this important, and how literate are we as a society in our financial world?
Well, think about this. Every day, all of us have some sort of financial decision. We're dealing with money, whether we're saving money, spending money. And it's important from two aspects. One, it's to help people understand finances and understand where they can go if they have a fraud happen to them. They can come to the Department of Commerce. And it's to help seniors, for example, who have sometimes diminished capacity, the inability to handle their own affairs, and to come to the Department of Commerce or other agencies or other places to help them through, whether it's a nonprofit like the Lutheran Social Services, which we collaborate with, or things like that. So we look at it from two perspectives. One is to help people do better and well in their personal finances, again, from kindergarten through retirement. And second of all, from my perspective in terms of protecting consumers, I want to make sure that we stop fraud in its track. I've taken the approach that not on my watch. If I see it, I'm going to stop it. But oftentimes a fraud has happened, a scam has happened, and the money is gone. It could go to Jamaica, it could go, wherever it is, and we can't get the money back. So often the best way to, stop fraud is prevent it and educate people and say, look, if there's a problem, here's what it looks like. Just stop, don't get involved. Call us, call a trusted advisor, and then that way we can, help consumers.
I suspect as our society ages and we have more people in their senior years, in particular where a lot of financial stuff happens on the internet, where older people are less comfortable with it, are you seeing some more fraud in that area and some real need for literacy, financial literacy among the elderly?
Absolutely. Think about this. Most of the wealth in the United States is held by senior citizens, the baby boom generation, about 70%.
Wow.
Every year, $25 billion estimated of financial scams are happening to senior citizens. And that's happening to Minnesotans. We see for seniors scams happening in, it could be in securities area. It's oftentimes on the internet, as you indicated. Some are getting involved in lottery scams. And then a lot of times they're getting calls on the phones. This week I did a joint tele-town hall conference with AARP Minnesota, where we talked to hundreds of senior citizens about this very issue to help stop fraud against senior citizens.
So you must have lots of partners, because obviously you can't do all of these things on your own. What about your federal partners? How do you interact? Certainly we in the health department, we interact with Health and Human Services and the Centers for Disease Control and NIH. Who do you interact with at the federal level and other state agencies, and how do you interact?
Well, there are, as you indicated, there's a number of them. So for example, in the insurance area and consumer protection, there's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a new federal agency. We work with, in the securities area, the Securities and Exchange Commission. On the banking area, because we regulate about 300 or so state banks in Minnesota, we work with Federal Reserve, the OCC, and the Department of Treasury. It's an interesting one with the Department of Treasury. They're recognizing us, and the White House has recognized Minnesota, just going back to the topic of financial literacy, as being one of the lead states. So we have a good collaboration with a lot of federal agencies, and we do, on the insurance side, also work with HHS for the ACA implementation issues, and of course your agency. So there's a variety.
Right.
There's
Good.
a number
Well,
of
you
them.
mentioned insurance, and that's going to be the last part of our show. But first, we're going to take a little break.
Great.
We'll be back right after this message.
Mom, Jordan wants to tell you some exciting news.
If you have a hard time hearing on the phone, now read what your caller says.
Grandma, I scored my first goal today!
Minnesota Relay brings you captioned telephone service. CapTel uses operator-assisted voice recognition technology to show captions of everything your caller says.
Oh, I'm so proud of you.
To learn more about this free service and the new CapTel phone, go to captelminnesota.com.
Welcome back. We're talking with Michael Rothman, Commissioner of the Department of Commerce in Minnesota, and we're talking about how his department interfaces with health and how it impacts health in our state. Mike, the last area I want to talk about is a huge area that we've certainly been working on together, and that's insurance, and particularly with the Affordable Care Act, and we've been engaged in health insurance exchange. So give us a little background about what your role is with health reform, in particular your role with insurance reform in Minnesota.
Well, the Department of Commerce oversees a large area of the insurance industry, including the health insurance industry. We work with your agency at the Department of Health to oversee, the commercial insurance companies. You oversee the HMOs. Together, actually, our staffs collaborate almost on a daily basis on how to, whether it's the financial solvency of the companies or the products that they sell. But together we work to oversee the health insurance marketplace in Minnesota. And then since the beginning of the administration, serving with you and of course Commissioner Jessen on the Governor's Health Reform Sub-Cabinet, we've worked on and interfaced on the Health Reform Task Force the Governor had. At the beginning, a large piece of our work at the Department of Commerce included incubating the Minnesota Insurance Exchange, which is just passed the legislature. It's now called MNsure. And then our departments will be working together in sort of the oversight of the insurance policies, products that we're doing. So sort of the regulatory function over the health insurance marketplace is a big swath of what the Department of Commerce does.
Talk a little bit about solvency. And I think people might not understand it. You know, why do we have these kinds of regulations about solvency for insurance plans?
Well, it's an important consumer protection and a public protection. Sometimes companies will start up and fail because they're not properly capitalized with enough financial wherewithal, money. And so our job is to make sure that these companies stay stable and healthy themselves so that they can deliver on the claims that are being paid, whether they're health insurance claims, into the future. So our job is to monitor the financial health and make sure that our companies in Minnesota are healthy from that financial solvency perspective.
So what about the rules and regulations that insurance plans have to have? You know, how do you determine, you know, what standards they need at what level? And how do you monitor it to make sure that they're providing what they're supposed to be providing?
Well, we have staff at the department that it's their responsibility to take a look at all of the products, the health insurance policies, for example, and to check and make sure that they comply with federal and state law, and that that they're delivering everything from, you know, consumer protection. It could be anything related to, you know, what exclusions, whether or not, in fact, they are financially sound products in and of themselves. So we have actuaries on staff, lawyers, policy, we call them policy analysts, that look at these policy forms to make sure that they're following federal and state guidelines.
Now, one of the things that the Affordable Care Act has talked about a lot about is essential health benefits.
Yeah.
You know, and that insurance plans, particularly those offered through the Health Insurance Exchange, now MNsure, have to provide the essential health benefits. What are they talking about when they say essential health benefits?
The Affordable Care Act passed and requires 10 categories of benefit levels. So good examples are ambulatory care, hospitalization, sort of basic level benefits in 10 categories throughout the country for the individual and the small group marketplace. And as you indicated, yes, through MNsure or the exchange, but also outside the exchange in both of those marketplaces. Minnesota has had a strong history of already having those kinds of requirements in law. And when the federal required these essential health benefit sets, they go into effect in 2014 and 2015. And this is basically set up by the United States Department of Health and Human Services. And the way and the process that they have decided to implement the essential health benefit set in Minnesota is to pick or to allow a selection of a particular plan. And in Minnesota's case, just to simplify this, the plan that was picked is a Health Partners insurance policy plan for the small group market. It meets the 10 essential health benefit set categories we were talking about. And it also complies with the requirements in Minnesota law in terms of what health policies are supposed to have in them. So that plan has been selected and will be implemented as a baseline for Minnesota for the 2014 and 2015 plan years. And then we'll see what happens after that.
Great. Another area that I know you've been involved with is the high-risk pool for people in the past who've not been able to get insurance. And they enter something called the Minnesota Comprehensive Health Association, or MCHA. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that and what's happening with that high-risk pool, which is really one of the largest ones in the country.
Minnesota has been a leader in the country since the Minnesota Comprehensive Health Association, or MCHA, was established. There are 26,000 enrollees in Minnesota's plan, and these are folks who were denied coverage in the standard marketplace and could not get insurance in any other place. So that's why it's sort of the high-risk pool. So what we do in Minnesota is we've been able to cover a lot of people with health conditions through the MCHA plan. The Minnesota Department of Commerce, from a regulatory perspective, oversees MCHA. It's its own board and it's administered by plans. But again, we maintain and watch their solvency. We make sure that the plans are appropriate and following the law and all that. But under the Affordable Care Act, one of the benefits that are being implemented in 2014 is eliminating pre-existing conditions, meaning they'll be guaranteed issue. So most of these folks should not be denied coverage. And so for starting in January of 2014, a lot of these individuals will be able to purchase insurance either through MNsure or somewhere else in the marketplace. And we have been asked by the legislature, the Department of Commerce, in collaboration with MCHA, to figure out a transition plan. My view is that for all of these people, these 26,000 people, many of them have conditions that need treatment. My overall goal is to make sure that we transition and help them through this process, and that nobody's left.
Yeah, so MCHA should go away, should be picked up by the regular market, and they should all be covered. Mike, we're running out of time. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you for being a great partner in protecting and improving the health of Minnesotans. You have a big role to play, so glad to be working with you.
Thank you, Ed, and it's great to be here.
Good. And I'll be back with a closing comment right after this message.
When you throw away money on wasted electricity, you're throwing away everything you could have bought with it. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov.
The Institute of Medicine has defined public health as what we, as a society, do collectively to assure the conditions in which people can be healthy. This definition says nothing about doctors or nurses or sanitarians or nutritionists. It doesn't even say anything about hospitals or clinics or health departments. It talks about what we do collectively. That means that public health is not a place of employment. Rather, it is a point of view, a philosophy that you bring to your work, wherever that is. Further, the definition doesn't say anything about diseases or illness or injury. It talks about the conditions needed to be healthy. And as we learn more about what conditions actually impact health, we find that a lot of partners are needed in our collective efforts who know about housing, transportation, energy, education, insurance, business, agriculture, city planning, architecture, climatology, and many, many more. Health impacts all aspects of our daily lives, and every aspect of our society affects health. There are health implications in all policies. There are health outcomes that are affected by all systems. There are health effects in all programs. There is health in all activities. That's why we need all of you to be part of the public health team. Thanks for watching. I hope you can join us again next time on A Public Health Journal.